Welcome to Global Glimpse, your daily window into the stories shaping America's law and government. Today's top headline: millions of Americans are taking to the streets in what is being called the No Kings protests, a massive nationwide movement pushing back against what many see as creeping authoritarianism in the U.S. government. Across more than 2,600 cities and towns, from New York to Los Angeles, millions have flooded public squares carrying signs reading "No Kings. We the people and democracy lives here." The movement sparked largely through grassroots organizing on social media has drawn participants from every political background: conservatives, liberals, independents, and moderates, united under one core belief that no single leader, no matter how powerful, should stand above the law or the Constitution. The protests began as a response to recent assertions of executive power that critics say undermine the balance of authority between the branches of government. The tipping point came after controversial statements from former and current officials suggesting that the presidency should have near absolute authority during national crises, a sentiment that many see as a direct challenge to democratic norms. Organizers of the No Kings movement argued that the U.S. was founded on the principle of limited government, and any deviation from that principle risks turning democracy into tyranny. In Washington, D.C., tens of thousands gathered on the National Mall, chanting in unison as speakers from various civic organizations and universities took the stage. The scene was one of both defiance and unity. Flags waved, choirs sang patriotic songs, and crowds cheered as calls for accountability echoed through the Capitol. Among the notable speakers was retired Judge Emily Raines, who told the crowd, "The Constitution was written not for kings, but for citizens. We cannot allow fear or power to erase the limits our founders fought to establish." Reports from across the country suggest that the protests have remained largely peaceful, though there were isolated clashes between demonstrators and counter-protest groups in some states. In Portland and Atlanta, police made a handful of arrests related to property damage. But authorities describe the overall movement as orderly and highly organized. Local governments, mindful of recent tensions, have emphasized that the right to protest is protected under the First Amendment, a point protesters have repeatedly invoked throughout the rallies. Political leaders have responded with mixed reactions. Supporters of the demonstrations praise them as a sign of civic strength and political engagement, arguing that Americans are exercising their democratic rights at a critical moment in the nation's history. Opponents, however, accuse the movement of being politically motivated, claiming that it unfairly targets certain leaders and policies while ignoring broader issues of governance and national security. The White House has yet to release a formal statement. Though administration officials have called for respectful dialogue and lawful demonstration, social media has played a massive role in mobilizing the movement. On platforms like X, TikTok, and Instagram, the hashtag #NoKingsProtest has surpassed 100 million views, and live streams from major cities continue to draw huge online audiences. Digital activists are using these platforms not only to share updates from the ground, but also to organize legal aid for arrested protesters and coordinate supply chains for those participating in long-term demonstrations. Experts say this level of digital coordination mirrors the online organizing strategies seen during the 2020 George Floyd protests, but with a distinctly constitutional message. Economically, the protests have had limited impact so far, though several cities have reported temporary closures of government offices and major roads. Analysts suggest the larger concern isn't financial, it's political. The sheer scale of the No Kings movement signals a deeper tension in American democracy, one that could influence upcoming elections and shape the national debate about presidential powers for years to come. Many political commentators warn that ignoring these protests could further polarize the nation, while others believe this renewed civic engagement may actually strengthen democratic institutions in the long run. In historical context, movements like this are not unprecedented. From the civil rights marches of the 1960s to the anti-war demonstrations of the 1970s, the U.S. has a long tradition of public dissent. But what makes the No Kings protests distinct is their cross-partisan appeal, the message isn't tied to a single party or ideology. Instead, it reflects a growing anxiety about the erosion of checks and balances. in a shared determination to preserve the democratic system at any cost. As the protests continue into their second week, organizers have announced plans for a March for Liberty in Washington, D.C. next weekend, which they expect to draw even larger crowds. Law enforcement officials are preparing for the event, coordinating with local governments to ensure security and public safety. Meanwhile, political analysts are watching closely, viewing this as a potential turning point in the national conversation about freedom, authority, and the future of governance in the United States. The message echoing through the streets is simple but powerful. No kings, no tyrants, only democracy. Whether these protests will lead to lasting policy changes remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. Millions of Americans are once again reminding their leaders that power in the United States does not come from above. It comes from the people. This is Global Glimpse, bringing you the truth behind the headlines. If you found this report informative, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more daily updates on law, government, and the evolving face of democracy in America.